Many of these RPGs have fan translations, thanks to fans and their hard work to make them playable. But let's be real, it would have been so much easier if studios had done it officially. Instead, masterpieces stayed locked in Japan or Korea. So today, let's dive into 12 RPGs that never got an official English release. Most people know Dragon Quest for the mainline adventures, or maybe for Dragon Quest Monsters, the spin-offs that actually reached the West. But in 2003, on the Game Boy Advance, Japan got a title that never crossed borders officially, Dragon Quest Monsters Caravan Heart. And that's where the story of this forgotten gem begins. Unlike the earlier Monsters games that focused almost entirely on catching creatures, this entry shook things up. Here you weren't just building a team of slimes and drakes, you were managing a traveling caravan. Human characters joined your journey, each with jobs that affected how battles played out. Warriors, healers, and even oddball professions all had their place, making the mix of humans and monsters feel more strategic than ever. At the center of it all was Prince Kiefer, a familiar face for anyone who played Dragon Quest VII. Instead of saving the world in some grand epic, he was just a young hero carving his path across a harsh land, growing stronger as his caravan expanded. It gave the game a more personal, grounded feeling that set it apart. Even though the game sold well in Japan, Square Enix never bothered to localize it. Fans had to step in with their own patch, and that's the only way non-Japanese players ever got to experience it. And honestly, it's such a shame. Caravan Heart could have been a cult hit in the West, with its mix of monster collecting and RPG caravan management. Instead, it remains one of those lost gems, the kind of RPG you only hear about in lists like this. In the 90s, the RPG scene in Japan was filled with ambitious ideas, and one of the titles that stood out was Emerald Dragon. Released first for Japanese PCs and later adapted to the Super Famicom, it placed players in the role of a Trushin, a dragon who abandons his natural form to live as a human. That setup alone made the story different, because instead of following a nameless hero on a predictable quest, you were controlling a character already marked by sacrifice and responsibility. The heart of the game was Trushin's bond with a childhood friend, and the journey to protect her gave the narrative a more personal feel than most RPGs of the time. You weren't chasing after fame, you weren't answering a prophecy. You were dealing with loyalty and the consequences of leaving behind what you truly were. That perspective made the plot refreshing when compared to other fantasy adventures released during the same period. Combat also helped the game stand out. Battles took place on a grid, giving encounters a tactical look, but they played out with a faster pace. Characters moved around freely, attacks required positioning, and magic blended naturally into the system. It wasn't overcomplicated, and yet it demanded enough strategy to keep players engaged. Emerald Dragon didn't receive much recognition outside its home country, but what it delivered was a solid mix of heartfelt storytelling and creative gameplay. It remains one of those RPGs that showed how much variety the genre could offer during the 90s. If you've been around retro RPG communities, chances are you've at least heard whispers of Bahamut Lagoon, one of Square's more unusual releases on the Super Famicom back in 1996. I decided to try it recently, and it didn't take long to see why it still gets mentioned among hidden classics. On the surface, it looks like a tactical RPG similar to Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics, but it hides a feature that completely changes how you approach the game: dragons. Every squad you command has a dragon partner, and instead of directly controlling them, you guide their growth. Feeding them different items changes their stats, abilities, and even their personalities. Sometimes they follow your orders, other times they act on their own, which makes battles feel unpredictable in the best way. Watching them evolve from small creatures into giant beasts is as satisfying as leveling up your human characters. The story, built around a rebellion against an empire, is familiar, but the way the dragons tie into both combat and world building gives it a unique identity. The presentation also holds up surprisingly well. Colorful sprite work, solid animations, and a soundtrack that captures the grand tone Square was known for during that era. Finishing a few chapters reminded me that Square in the 90s wasn't afraid to experiment beyond Final Fantasy. Bahamut Lagoon might not have become a franchise, but it left a strong impression. For players willing to dig into older titles, it's one of those discoveries that feels rewarding, the kind of RPG that shows there's always more to uncover beyond the big names. When people in the West hear the name Tales of Destiny 2, confusion often follows. That's because Namco originally gave the title, Tales of Eternia, the Destiny 2 label overseas, while the true sequel remained exclusive to Japan. Released for the PlayStation 2 in 2002, Tales of Destiny 2 built directly on the events of the first game and expanded the series in new ways, yet never saw an official English release. The plot centers on Kyle Dunamis, the son of Stan from the original story. Unlike his heroic father, Kyle starts out as an impulsive and inexperienced young man, eager to step out of his father's shadow. This focus on growth gives the narrative a personal tone, showing the journey from immaturity to responsibility while weaving in themes of legacy, courage, and friendship. Combat refined the linear motion battle system that defined the franchise. Fights were fast-paced and smooth, encouraging players to chain combos, manage skills, and keep the action flowing. It felt more dynamic than earlier titles, almost like an action game wrapped in an RPG framework. The system became a foundation for how the series would evolve in later years. Visually, the game kept the 2D sprite work that fans loved, but with added detail and personality. Character skits between battles deepened interactions, and the soundtrack supported everything from dramatic showdowns to lighter, comedic breaks. Although it stayed in Japan, Tales of Destiny 2 represents a turning point in the series. It connected directly to its roots while pushing forward with mechanics and storytelling that influence future entries, leaving a lasting mark despite its limited reach. In 1996, Sega released a title that blurred the line between RPG and visual novel in a way few games had attempted before. Sakura Wars, launched on the Sega Saturn, combined strategic battles with character-driven storytelling, creating an experience that felt unique even in a crowded market of Japanese role-playing games. While later entries in the series eventually reached the West, the original remained exclusive to Japan, leaving many players unaware of how influential it was. The game takes place in an alternate version of early 20th century Tokyo, where steam-powered technology fuels both daily life and military defense. Players assume the role of a young officer assigned to command a squad of mecha pilots. What sets the premise apart is that these pilots are not just soldiers, but also performers in a theater troupe. This unusual blend of stage drama and battlefield duty adds a layer of charm rarely seen in RPGs. Gameplay is divided into two halves. Off the battlefield, players interact with teammates, choosing dialogue options that shape relationships and determine morale. On the battlefield, combat unfolds in turn-based strategy missions, where positioning and unit synergy matter as much as raw stats. The contrast between lighthearted theater scenes and tense combat created a rhythm that kept the experience engaging from start to finish. Sakura Wars stood out for its ambition. It offered a mix of genres that might have seemed risky at the time, but the balance between narrative, character interaction, and strategy paid off. The game laid the foundation for a long-running franchise, showing how far RPGs could stretch when developers were willing to break traditional molds. Not every Squaresoft project in the 90s aimed to be epic or dramatic, and Gokenjo Bukentai, released for the Super Famicom in 1996, is proof of that. While the company was known worldwide for grand adventures like Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger, this smaller RPG went in the opposite direction. It embraced comedy, charm, and a slice-of-life feel that made it very different from the studio's bigger titles. The story centers on a group of kids exploring their neighborhood, turning ordinary situations into colorful adventures. The plot avoids the usual save-the-world setup, focusing instead on quirky characters and funny encounters. That lighthearted approach makes the game feel refreshing, especially when compared to the more serious tone of most RPGs from the same era. Gameplay follows the familiar turn-based formula, but emphasizes fun over heavy challenge. Battles include eccentric enemies and humorous skills, keeping the pace lively rather than grind-heavy. The structure feels straightforward, making it easy to pick up while still offering enough variety to keep things interesting. Graphically, Gokenjo Bukentai leans into a cartoon style with exaggerated sprites and bright colors. The environments echo everyday Japan through a playful lens, giving the world a charm that fits perfectly with the comedic tone. Its soundtrack reinforces the upbeat feel, carrying a sense of fun throughout the adventure. Gokenjo Bukentai may not have achieved fame like Squaresoft's major hits, but it stands as one of the studio's most distinctive experiments, showing how flexible RPGs could be when the focus was shifted from epic drama to pure charm. Before Magna Carta became known worldwide with Tears of Blood, the series started in South Korea with Magna Carta Phantom of Avalanche, a PC RPG released in 2001. Developed by Softmax, it introduced the world of Euphoria and set the foundation for the franchise's mix of political drama, distinctive art design, and ambitious mechanics. Despite its influence on later games, this first chapter never had an official English release. The story follows Callance, a young warrior struggling with loss while caught in conflicts that divide the continent. Instead of relying on prophecies or chosen one tropes, the plot focused on shifting alliances, betrayal, and survival. This approach gave the narrative a heavier and more personal tone, making it stand out compared to more traditional fantasy adventures of the time. Combat used a turn-based system with a timing mechanic that rewarded precise input to maximize attacks. It added rhythm and strategy to encounters, creating a flow that kept battles engaging without being repetitive. Customization options for skills and equipment deepened the system, letting players experiment with different approaches. The game's presentation also deserves attention, with character designs by Korean artist Hyung-tae Kim. Phantom of Avalanche immediately stood out visually. The bold style, detailed settings, and atmospheric soundtrack combined to create an identity unlike other RPGs of its era. While later entries would reach a global audience, Phantom of Avalanche remains a forgotten starting point, remembered for its creativity and as the game that planted the seeds of a unique RPG series. Among the many RPGs released late on the Super Famicom, Lennis 2 is one of the most ambitious yet overlooked. Launched in 1996 as a sequel to Paladin's Quest, known as Lennis in Japan, it expanded the universe with a broader scope, more characters, and a stronger focus on storytelling. Instead of following a single hero, the game spread its narrative across multiple protagonists whose paths eventually converged. This structure allowed the story to show different sides of the same conflict, making the journey feel larger and more layered than many RPGs of its time. Themes of divine power, ancient seals, and political tension gave the game a dramatic edge. Combat stayed turn-based, but with twists that encouraged experimentation. Magic came from elemental orbs, and customizing abilities played a key role in shaping strategies. The system rewarded players who tried new combinations, offering more freedom than the average RPG formula. Graphically, Lennis 2 stood out with its imaginative art direction. The alien-like style of characters and environments gave it a unique identity compared to traditional fantasy settings. Combined with colorful sprites and a strong soundtrack, the presentation made the adventure visually striking. Lennis 2 never left Japan through official channels, which limited its reach. Still, it remains a fascinating look at how developers pushed the limits of the Super Famicom at the end of its life cycle, delivering an RPG that dared to look and play differently. Tactical RPG fans often point to the Front Mission franchise as one of the most ambitious series of its era, and by the mid-2000s, it reached a clear peak with Front Mission 5. Released on the PlayStation 2 in 2005, it tied together storylines from previous entries while refining every aspect of its gameplay. Despite its scale and polish, it was never officially localized, leaving it as a hidden giant in the strategy RPG genre. The story spans decades, following Walter Feng through shifting alliances, long wars, and the consequences of political upheaval. Instead of telling a short, isolated tale, the narrative moves across multiple conflicts, allowing characters to age and evolve while showing how events ripple over time. This wide perspective gave the game a level of realism and weight rarely seen in the genre. Combat once again placed players in control of customizable Wanzers, the iconic battle mechs of the series. The sheer number of parts, weapons, and builds offered endless possibilities, letting each squad feel unique. Positioning, timing, and resource management remained critical, rewarding smart planning while punishing reckless choices. Victories felt earned, and every defeat carried lessons to take forward. The presentation pushed the PlayStation 2 to its limits, with detailed mech models, cinematic storytelling, and a powerful soundtrack. Combined with its long and layered campaign, the game stood out as one of the most complete tactical RPG experiences of its generation. Even though it never reached a worldwide release, Front Mission 5 is remembered as the moment the series truly showed its full potential. In the same year that Square launched Bahamut Lagoon, another RPG appeared on the Super Famicom that pushed boundaries in a different way. Rudra no Hihu, also called Treasure of the Rudras. I tried it recently, and what immediately stood out was its magic system. Instead of learning fixed spells, you type words to create your own. Mixing certain letters or phrases generates different elemental effects, and once you get used to it, combat becomes much more flexible and creative than in most 16-bit RPGs. The story also takes a unique approach. Rather than one party, the game is split into 3 scenarios with different protagonists. Each arc explores the world from another angle, and they eventually connect in a larger finale. It feels ambitious for for the time, offering more variety than the typical single narrative most players were used to. Visually, Rudra no Hihu is classic late Super Nintendo Square. Detailed sprites, colorful settings, and a dramatic soundtrack that fits the tone perfectly. It has that polished look you'd expect from the studio right before they moved to PlayStation. What makes it memorable is how all these pieces come together. The custom magic system, the multi-story structure, and the presentation give it a personality of its own. Even with so many RPGs released in the 90s, this one still manages to feel distinct, and playing it today shows why fans still talk about it as one of Square's forgotten experiments. On the Super Famicom in 1995, Createch released Metal Max Returns, a remake of the original Metal Max from the Famicom, and one of the most unique RPGs of its time. While most role-playing games followed linear paths with heroes chosen by destiny, Metal Max broke away from tradition by offering a semi-open world where players could freely explore, hunt bounties, and upgrade tanks instead of relying solely on swords and magic. The game begins with the player creating a small party and setting out across a wasteland filled with dangerous enemies and mechanical beasts. Instead of being forced into a set storyline, progression depends on completing contracts, gathering money, and building stronger vehicles. Tanks are the real stars, with endless customization options that let players swap weapons, armor, and engines. This focus on machinery gave the game a style closer to post-apocalyptic adventures than traditional fantasy RPGs. Battles are turn-based but revolve around managing your armored vehicles. Repairs, ammunition, and fuel all factor into survival, creating a layer of resource management that made encounters feel more tactical. While you can still fight on foot, heading into battle without a tank was usually a recipe for disaster. Visually, Metal Max Returns had the colorful sprite work expected of the Super Famicom, but its ruined towns, deserts, and futuristic machines set it apart from other games apart from typical medieval settings. Its soundtrack complemented the atmosphere, mixing upbeat battle tracks with moody overworld themes. Metal Max Returns stood out as an RPG that gave players freedom to choose their path. Instead of being pushed along a single story, it allowed exploration, experimentation, and creativity, making it one of the most innovative 16-bit RPGs that never left Japan officially. Few RPGs have dared to parody their own industry as directly as Sega Gaga, a Dreamcast release from 2001 that turned Sega's real struggles into the foundation of its story. Instead of fighting monsters or saving kingdoms, players were tasked with saving a company on the brink of collapse. The result was an RPG that mixed humor, satire, and surprisingly sharp commentary about game development. The player takes control of a rookie manager, given the impossible mission of bringing Sega back to success. Progress doesn't come through traditional battles, but by managing development teams, solving odd challenges, and facing rivals that clearly parody competing consoles. Every encounter pokes fun at industry cliches while showing the stress behind the business side of gaming. Gameplay blends simple RPG systems with management simulation. Instead of equipping swords and armor, players deal with eccentric developers, motivate overworked teams, and make choices that affect the company's future. Classic Sega characters appear throughout, serving as cameos and reminders of the brand's legacy. Visually, the game keeps things light with colorful 2D art and quirky designs that match its playful tone. The soundtrack and constant jokes make it clear this was both a farewell and a self-parody. Sega Gaga remains one of the most unusual RPGs ever made. It's equal parts parody, social critique, and fan service, capturing Sega's struggles with humor while offering an experience no other studio would have dared to create at the time. We just explored 12 incredible RPGs that never had an official English release. Some stood out for bold gameplay ideas, others for unique stories or unforgettable style, but all of them remind us how much the genre still hides beyond the famous titles we already know. Fan translations kept many of these adventures alive, yet it's easy to imagine how much bigger they could have been if studios had brought them to the West. If you enjoyed this journey through Forgotten Gems, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next list of hidden RPGs waiting to be discovered.